If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the strangest, creepiest thing that has happened to you, that left you saying what the hell was that? Went camping with school. Stayed in a fairly nice campsite in the woods. The very first night about 6 of us shared a big tent and were all laughing and joking as kids do. Then one of the lads suddenly says, "What the duck is that?" with a genuine look of horror on his face. So we rush to his side of the tent and peer out into the darkness towards the big communal campfire, and I shit you not, all 6 of us saw what I can only describe as a pair of white legs, no upper half, walking around the campfire before vanishing. We were in shock for a while before we all collectively just laughed hysterically whilst crying inside. Still to this day I have no idea what we saw. It genuinely looked like a pair of white trousers just walking around. Got up at like 2 a.m. to go pee because I was still up. While washing my hands I saw something move very fast past the bathroom door, only saw through the creak. About 27 years ago, I looked out my bathroom window while using it around 2 or 3 a.m. There was a lightning storm, and while looking outside during a particularly bright, lengthy episode of lightning, bluish/green/yellow color, I shit you not, I saw something run extremely fast along the side of the road that went past my house. This thing ran razor straight along the white line on the shoulder. It looked like a smallish, hooded creature, wearing a cloak. I'm an objective, pragmatic human being, and I've tried to be rational, reasoning with myself that it was a black, plastic trash bag blowing in the wind, but if so, shouldn't it have been moving a bit more slowly and billowy, blowing around in the air and in no particular pattern? I've tried to consider what I saw was a tire rolling down the road, being forced along by the wind, but wouldn't it have been a bit wonky, maybe a bit wobbly? And would it roll at such super speed? This thing that I saw, it was close to the ground, appeared to be running in a straight line, which I could clearly see because of the white shoulder line. It seemed adjacent. I wasn't particularly tired, and hadn't fallen asleep yet, so I wasn't groggy. I was completely lucid and do not do drugs. I freaking know what I saw, and still try to rationalize it away, but I can't. I refer to it as a gremlin, because, sure, why not? A small, cloaked, hooded creature running quickly along the road during a pretty big storm? Seems fair enough, even if I have trouble believing it despite knowing what I ducking saw. I never tell this story anymore. My husband affectionately laughs at me, and people are skeptical, including myself. But I'm sharing since you clearly saw it, too. My husband goes to work early, before the sun rises, so he told me to take this with a grain of salt. He was on his way to work when he saw something massive approach the road in his peripheral vision. He braked in anticipation and the oncoming car seemed to see it too and likewise screeched to a halt. Then this massive thing, which he described as a white sheet type thing, think the stereotypical white sheet ghost, crossed the road and disappeared into the trees. The car behind him honked so he got going but saw, as he drove past, the driver of the oncoming car, just sitting there, staring wide-eyed and confused. He says he wishes he had pulled over and talked to the guy to discuss what he saw because they both stopped to let whatever that thing was cross the road. This was early last month or so. He says every day he still kinda slows down in that area to see if whatever it was manifests again. At the time, I never really thought much of it because of my age. When I was around 8 to 9 years old, we used to live in a semi-detached house where the stairs were by the left side of the house and the neighbor's home was to the right. Important for later, another important fact was that an old guy used to live there and unfortunately passed away. I made friends with the neighbor's kids because we realized we went to the same school. One day I was walking up the stairs whilst knocking my knuckles against the wall playfully like any child would. I heard something knock back and at the time I was young, so I assumed it was the neighbor's kid knocking from the other side. I knocked again and heard the wall knock back. It wasn't until I recalled the memory and floor plan that the neighbor's house wasn't aligned with the stairs. The other side of the wall I knocked on was plain land. I was on a volunteer fire department and we were called out to a single vehicle rollover. There were 2 occupants in the vehicle, a guy and a girl, boyfriend and girlfriend, and the girl was very much dead when we got there. We waited with the guy on the tailgate of the vehicle until the ambulance arrived and stabilized him for transport to hospital. While we were waiting he explained that they were sitting side by side, cuddling as they drove and sharing Mike and Ike's between each other's lips while kissing. The next day the fire department had a debriefing meeting to check in on one another after such a stressful event. This one guy starts explaining a recurring dream he had where the girl who died in the crash was trying to get his attention to explain what had happened, how they had a candy between their lips kissing. He didn't even know what Mike and Ike's were, but kind of explained that they were like candy Tic Tacs that were longer and started with the letter M. When one of us suggested Mike and Ike's, he exclaimed, "That's it. That's what she was trying to tell me." This freaked the hell out of me. The guy was on tragic duty for this call and was easily more than 500 yards from the scene of the accident. There were only 3 firefighters at the actual scene, I being one of them. Because the accident was late in the evening, we didn't debrief immediately after because everyone needed their sleep. There was no way Buddy could have known this intimate detail of the crash. It was all unexplainable and easily the eeriest things I have ever experienced. This happened back in the mid-80s. My sister's ex-boyfriend and I, we were friends, they were still on friendly terms as they shared a child, were driving home from San Bernardino. We were traveling west on Interstate 10. It was around 8:30 p.m. or so. We both noticed a really bright light, looked sort of like flames, to our direct right. There were fields to our right. We felt a little rumble, then we saw, both of us, although I was also driving so had to be careful, a missile or something literally fly up into the sky from the ground. We weren't drunk or high, we were just surprised. We saw other people looking over to the right as well from their cars. 2 cars actually pulled off the freeway to the side. I was scared shitless. I told him to put it on one of the news stations. I told him try KFWB. He did and he was near tears. We seriously thought we were going to war or something. Finally, we put it on another station. We were still on the freeway, and we stopped on Kias and they were actually talking about it but didn't have any specific details on it. Maybe a minute's worth of talking about it. We finally got home and busted in the house telling everyone what we saw, and I turned the TV to one of the main stations, hoping for a special report to break in. He went and turned on my stereo to the news station. Nothing. No reports other than the small snippet from Kias FM. We searched newspapers, watched news, listened to news for the next week. Nothing. We both absolutely saw this, as did other people on the freeway, but nothing was ever spoken about it after that. My dad, my brother, and I were at house with several outbuildings that my uncle had bought to fix up and sell. My uncle was showing us around. It was a very weird place. It had wainscoting over a door in the basement and a long tunnel running to the outside with metal teeth over the end. You could see sunlight through the tunnel. It was just big enough for a small man to crawl through. On the main floor, at the back, was a room with a lock on the outside. The room's walls were covered in black plastic, no windows. The floor was painted blue with milk paint. I felt an immediate sense of foreboding and refused to stay in the room. My brother and I went and looked at the Quonset house that was one of the outbuildings. It must have been set up for a family member. Upon opening the door, we found the main room almost knee-deep in kids' toys. We walked towards the front where the kitchen was. There was no door, just a curtain. I immediately had an intrusive thought that told me that there was a family in there at a formica table with silver edges. The mother was cooking and there was a man and 2 kids there. I completely felt that is what I would see. I could see that the table and kitchen were yellow. All of this in my head. I pulled back the curtain and, of course, no one was there, but I had the kitchen correctly in my head. The entire layout was exactly what I thought it would be. My brother and I turned and left without speaking about it. About 10 years later, I brought it up to my brother about what I thought I'd see after opening the curtain. He said to me, "That's exactly what I thought I'd see too." Something bad happened at that house. I don't know what it was, but something bad happened. I was walking my dog one day in the park. The park is pretty big, with a lake and a part where the path leads through the woods. Me being a dumbass, I forgot it was getting dark early, but I decided to continue walking. My dog is pretty big and protective, so I felt safe enough. She was walking loose ahead of me, her collar has red lights in them, when we turned the corner through the woods. It was getting darker and darker, and even though I know the park like my back pocket, I turned on the flashlight on my phone. Anyway, a few minutes go by. Just silence, sounds of my footsteps and the wind in the trees, when my dog suddenly started growling. I stopped, she's standing a few feet away, just a ring of red light staring at the trees. I call her and she's by my side in a second. I don't know why, but I dismissed it as dumb doggy behavior like smelling a rabbit or whatever and keep walking. Very stupid, I know. So we keep walking, dog by my side, my flashlight in front of me. We turn another corner and my dog growling again. This time I freak out a little and look around me with the flashlight. Nothing. It was just a minute of walking before the path led us back into the park. I could make a run for it, but I had this weird feeling. So I took a few steps forward and saw someone standing a little away on the path. Just standing there. Like they just appeared out of nothing. It was weird and I immediately felt nauseous. My dog starts full on barking, growling, back hair standing up. She's a very social dog, even with complete strangers, so this had to be bad. Her barking kind of shocked me into moving. The moment I grabbed her to turn around to make a run for it, the figure stepped forward. I never ran so hard. I ran all the way back to the little bridge that connected the neighborhood to the park. My dog was still with me, thank God. The moment I got home I called the local police and asked them to check it out. They didn't take it that seriously, because nothing bad happened, but they sent a car over. They found nobody, of course. I slept badly that night and it took me a while to walk there again, even in daylight. I was walking a path in the woods at a park and started a little too late and it started getting dark faster than I'd thought, so I'm hustling to get back to the main parking lot. I had my pit with me. I cut this sharp corner and hear a faint distant scream sound and shoot my flashlight in its direction and see a decent-sized 2-story abandoned run-down house about 50 feet away from the path. A hole ducking house. I'd hiked this path at least a dozen times before and never noticed any buildings. Sprinted back to my car, dog jumped in, raced home. Took a year and a half to go back on a picnic with friends. I pointed out the house when we walked by it and they made comments about how it's been there forever and it's super creepy and dangerous and the city need to take it down but it's too expensive blah blah blah. I somehow missed a whole ass house in these woods a dozen times just to find it in the dark by myself. It was a nice and sunny day by the sea at our summer cabin. My cousin and I took my grandpa's boat and went exploring a bunch of islands nearby. We live in a place with a bunch of archipelago. After a while we get this island a little further out. We cruise along the shoreline when we notice a small opening, just big enough for our boat to fit through. It was definitely man-made, so we decide to check it out. After about 50 meters or so, sorry Americans, I'm European, we arrive at a pond, and it's almost perfectly round. At the other side of the opening/canal we see an old gazebo that's barely standing. We get to the middle of the pond, and then we notice it. Every sound we heard earlier has gone quiet. No seagulls, no wind, no nature noises. The only thing we can hear is the sound of us rowing. I can only describe the lack of sound as thick silence. It was weird. Of course, the sun vanishes behind some clouds and suddenly the pond seems extremely dark. Tough, it was very shallow. We were trying to joke about ghosts coming to get us, but both of us were clearly nervous. Out of nowhere a plank in the gazebo falls from the roof and lands with a loud bang on the floor. We nearly jumped out of our skins. We both decided it's time to go, turn the boat around and I start rowing. We were almost at the opening again when we hear what sounded like groaning and thumping coming from the gazebo. Keep in mind, I was facing the gazebo while rowing. I saw something move behind it, but I couldn't make out what it was because I was panicking. When we got out, back to the regular world, everything was normal. Wind, birds, natural sounds. Even the sun came back. We have no idea what the hell happened back there, and it could very well have been some animal. But that whole place felt wrong, and wind doesn't stop because of a nearby predator. Someday, we will go back again and see what happens. My dog likes to chase rabbits, but he doesn't know what to do with them once he grabs them. Last summer, I let him out in the backyard to run around for a few minutes while I got ready for bed. No one else was home. After a few minutes I hear him barking like crazy, and come out to find him standing over a dead cottontail and freaking out. I put him back inside, and figure the only thing to do is to bury the rabbit far enough that he can't dig it back up again. I grab the shovel from the front porch, but when I get back to the other side, the rabbit is totally gone. I think it's weird, but maybe the bunny was only injured or something and has made it to safety. So I pass back through the house to return the shovel to its place. Note that the house isn't very big, and it's only been about a minute since I managed to coax my dog away from his prize. I open the front door, and there is the same rabbit, lying in the same position on the top step of my front porch, still super dead. I freaked out and locked all the doors immediately. Nothing else happened, but if it did, at least I had a fierce little dog with me. So we live in a really wooded part of Texas. This was around 11 p.m. and my mom was having a laughing fit in the living room over something she saw on the internet or talking on the phone with a friend. I don't remember. Point is, when she laughs really hard she has a sorta hoo-hoo-hoo laugh. But like in a laughing tone? I can't describe it. Imagine that noise but you're laughing lol. Well, I walk past the living room into the kitchen and as I do I start mocking her hoo-hoo-hoo. She gets annoyed and tells me to go away, and continues on. I grabbed my car keys to grab a charger or something from my car, turn on my phone's flashlight and go around the house to my car. It's completely dark, no light other than mine, and no noises. I could hear my mom laughing inside, but it was sorta muffled. When I ducking hear it. I was at the front of my car about to reach for the door when clear as ducking day dude. Hoo. I froze. I didn't know what to ducking do. I know it wasn't an echo because I heard it literally behind the car a few feet away from me. I didn't know if I should run, scream, or try and see what it was. I jumped in the car as quick as I could and locked the doors. I waited for about 20 minutes and ran straight back inside. I told my mom and she just scoffed at me. I honestly don't know what the duck that was. I'm convinced something made that noise. It sounded human? I don't know, it wasn't an animal, and living in the woods for so long I know it wasn't an owl. No other animal around here makes a noise like that. When I was maybe 9 or 10, my cousin and I were playing in her room. Well, we got into a fight over something dumb and my uncle came in cause he heard us fighting. He shouted at us and then sent my cousin to time out in a different room and left me in time out in my cousin's room. So naturally I started looking around for something to mess around / play with while I waited for my uncle to come back. In this stack of toys I was sitting next to was a stuffed pig that my aunt's mom made for her when she was a little kid and she handed down to my cousin. It was already a sort of creepy looking toy. Picture a long reddish pink sausage shaped stuffed pig with eyes and a snout but no eyes / mouth. But it was also really soft and cuddly, so I remember picking it up to play with. And I swear to God, when I picked it up, the damn thing oinked at me. The thing is, this wasn't one of those toys with a Build-A-Bear voice chip buried inside. This was, as far as I know, a plain old stuffed animal that somehow made an oinking noise when I picked it up. I immediately threw it and ran out of the room and never told anyone what happened. I'd played with that toy before and picked it up / played with it a few times after that, but only with my cousin around, and never once heard it make that sound except for that one time. Freaky stuff. Friends and I went hunting / camping away from home. We have made this trip annually and sometimes twice for the last 9+ years. In the last year we finally moved spots about a few miles down the road from our original one. To set the stage, I'm a 2X war vet, so I sleep fast and hard. I slept through rocket attacks and my wife questions if I'm alive sometimes. We are sleeping in a soft-sided pop-up camper. At about 3 a.m. I'm woken up out of a dead sleep by a noise that sounds like 2x4 boards being slapped together. Every 5 to 7 seconds it does it, one time except it's moving. It's loud and I can hear the echo off the trees. This goes on for minutes and it moves from my right side to my left side and eventually further off in the distance, almost following the river we are camped near. No one else is awake or heard it. The next day we talk about it and they think I'm crazy. That next night though, I get my laughs. Again, woken up out of a dead sleep by this thing. This time everyone wakes up. Same exact sound. The tone, pitch, loudness never changes until it moves away and then it slowly gets softer. But the sound is exactly the same every time. It only happened 2 of the 3 nights we were there. I Google and I find stories from birds to Bigfoot. It became a running joke. Well, the next year we head back down to do it again. This time we camped about a 1/4 mile up from the other campsite by the river. I ended up having to leave early, but asked when they got back if they heard it. They did, but only 1 night out of 4. There was this time I was sitting outside at night, by myself having a little fire and a couple beers. Relaxing after a long hard week. Now, after my house there's only a couple more houses, a little church that rarely gets used, a big old cornfield, then a bypass. It wasn't that late, maybe 11 p.m. or midnight-ish. Normal night sounds and could hear vehicles, mostly semis on the bypass. Then it all slowly faded out. It was silent. No night sounds, no vehicles on the bypass, nothing. I had gotten this weird chill on the back of my neck that went from left to right and got goosebumps. It wasn't cold out. It was summertime. My dad and brother had talked about seeing a soldier from like World War I believe. My dad had said the neighbor asked if anyone around did reenactments, because he had seen it also. So, that's all I could think of. Now, I didn't see anything, but, I simply said, "Hey, I don't mean any disrespect, I'm just sitting here chilling around the fire with some beers. There's plenty of chairs if you want to take a load off and plenty of beers if you want to join me." I swear the fire got bigger, like someone put more wood on it. It was like that for a couple minutes, the whole atmosphere was just different. Then, all of a sudden, the fire died back down, the atmosphere seemed to go back to normal. The sounds of crickets started to come back, and more night noises came back as well as a few vehicles on the bypass. All in all, the whole situation lasted about 5 minutes. It was crazy. Now, I mentioned my dad and brother seeing this military man. My parents have owned the property for going on 47 years now. They moved away for a couple years and my now ex-wife and I lived there with our kids until my parents moved back. There's plenty of other situations from that house/property. I swear it's a hot spot for paranormal things. I mentioned this briefly in a similar post, but I guess I should expand on it in this one. When I was 12, I discovered these sound drugs called idosers, which were 30 to 60 sounds that claimed to give the user a 1 to 3 chance of experiencing the effects of the drug you were listening to. There were things like weed, acid, alcohol, and even claimed to make orgasm potentially. Now, me thinking I was a badass rebellious kid, I found the one that claimed to have real life-changing aspect, and there were 2 that major warnings about what you'll see, hear and feel if you listen to them. One was called God's Hand and the other Gates of Hades. Now, like I stated previously, I thought was badass rebellious kid, so I sit there and listen to Gates of Hades for about 45 minutes, and when it was over I so disappointed that nothing, or so I thought. I go to sleep that night, and around 3 a.m. I still have tears in my eyes as I write this. I look near the top of window, and hanging on my blind is the little imp/demon with evilest yellow eyes I have ever seen. Now, it had been a while since I prayed before I went, but I remember every word my mother taught that night, and it got so angry at me, and in an instant I looked away. It was, and 16 years later I'm still trying to figure if I was dreaming, hallucinating, or did that sound make me see something I was never meant to see. Scariest shit ever to happen to me. So a few years ago, my girlfriend was renting an attic apartment attached to a main house by stairs and a single door. One summer night, when the other tenant, the one who rented the main house, was gone for a few days, my girlfriend and I were watching a movie. Now, the attic apartment was set up so that the couch was facing away from the stairs/door that separated the house and attic. So as we're watching this movie, the door that separates the spaces slammed shut. We didn't even know it was opened. First thought was, oh, the door was opened a little and a window must be open somewhere causing circulation that closed the door. I mean, it is summer after all, so a window being opened isn't crazy. But guess what? No goddamn open window in the whole house. The AC was on. Therefore, we both take knives and our gun from upstairs and proceed to check the very dark house together, turning on all the lights as we go, all the while hearing our hearts beat out of our chests. We get to the downstairs den, about half underground, and nothing, no footsteps, no people, no anything. But then, the upstairs door slams again. WTF. So, we slowly make our way back upstairs, barricade the ducking door, check every closet and small space with no luck. And that was the night we slept with knives, a gun and fear in our souls. To this day, I don't know what happened exactly. It must have been a draft, but we never found the source. I was 16 and living in a rural area between New York State and Pennsylvania, on the New York side. I knew a girl who lived out in the boonies on the Pennsylvania side, 3 or 4 miles away, at that, and she wanted me to sneak into her room that night. Me, being the horny teenager that I was, ventured out on foot. She lived on a hill with a dirt road, and you had to walk up said dirt road through a heavily wooded area. On the way up, you can see significantly better than on the way down because of how the end of the woods faced the direction of the moon at night. Walking to her place went without a hitch. It was in the early morning that I began walking home, through the pitch dark woods. Thus, that's where the trouble began. The stretch of heavily wooded area went on for a mile or so. At the end of it is a clearing, with a light attached to someone's shed nearby. I was walking on this barely visible road when I heard a rustling, which is normal when you're out in the woods at night. I wasn't alarmed at the rustling, but more so at the fact that I heard something getting closer to me and it began screaming. Soon enough, this blood-curdling screeching was right next to my left ear. I was terrified and couldn't bring myself to stop or look to the side. I could only keep a steady pace and push on. I remember thinking that I just had to keep moving. Eventually, the screaming was directly behind me and then shortly after far away behind me. I never once looked back. As soon as I got the light that signaled the clearing, I ran all the way back home. I never really gave much thought to it in the following years except for a story that I'd tell around campfires. Some suggested it was a fox in heat and I considered that explanation to make a fair amount of sense. However, one night I was browsing some local legends and ghost stories on the internet when I found a legend for the area that I had walked through. Many people have reported hearing screaming when walking through that area, the story said, and many reported these things happening particularly in the woods. So, I did what any sane person would do and called that my signal that I had enough of the internet for that night and went to bed just a little more nervous than usual. Pretty sure I stumbled upon a witch cult with my friends while we were doing our Duke of Edinburgh award. Obviously I don't believe in witches, but that's what they call themselves. For anyone not in the UK, the D.of.E. award is something you're often encouraged to do while in school because they say it will look good on your CV. In reality no one cares. The main part of it is an overnight hiking and camping expedition somewhere in the countryside. We were in East Sussex, in the middle of the woods following a path that we had planned for our expedition when I heard what sounded like music. This was strange because we hadn't seen any people on this path and were pretty far from any houses or any other buildings for that matter. Once I heard it, I told my friends to be quiet and we realized it was actually singing. Being curious, we decided to take a look. I personally didn't see this, so from this point it is simply what a couple of my friends told me. 2 of them went further into the woods to see, while 3 of us stayed back because the whole situation seemed a bit creepy. Those 2 then came running back, visibly shaken by having seen what they described as about 20 robed people standing around an altar singing. Not really that scary, but this is in the middle of the woods, so a bit weird. After about 5 minutes, curiosity got the better of one of them, who went back for another look. He was surprised to find that they weren't there anymore, and when he walked a bit further on, he saw them running as a group through the woods. It was after a Google search when I got home that I found out about Sussex witch cults. Really weird. I was staying at a friend's share house after a board game night. There were several other people sleeping in the lounge room with me. I was having a dream that I was trying to keep all my friends safe from danger, and I thought it was going well until I suddenly realized I was wrong and woke up. I was lying completely awake in the room. Suddenly something very bright darted across my vision. It was very intense and impossible to ignore. It looked like a bright glowing blue humanoid figure running, but it had an elongated neck like a snake. It was bright enough to leave an after image behind for several seconds, so I got a good look at its shape. A few moments later, the guy lying next to me starts moaning and twitching in his sleep. He wakes up, so I ask him if he's okay. Half delirious, he tells me Mom always said ghosts weren't real, but Grandma always insisted they were. And then describes the nightmare he just had with a bright glowing blue spirit haunting his grandmother's house. I like reminding him of this story at Halloween. When I was 16 years old, I was in the woods with 2 friends. They wanted to go fishing and I just tagged along. We realized it was starting to get dark, so we start our trek through the woods to get back to the car. For visual purposes, there is a river that cuts through the woods and it's on our right side. We're just cruising along when all of a sudden we hear the biggest splash in the river. Of course, all 3 of us stop in our tracks to see what happened. For a minute or 2, we don't see anything until we notice a huge rock, I would dare to say boulder size, flying in the air coming towards from the other side of the river. It was like someone was using a catapult to launch them because they were too big for any human to throw, let alone pick up. It falls short and lands in the water. We're all in shock. We see no one or hear anything. Then, a second rock/boulder comes flying towards again, but it came closer to us, missing the river and hitting the side of the bank we were standing near. We stopped looking and ran for our lives. One of us lost a shoe and we were all pretty scratched up from running full force through branches. So yay, we were all asking what the hell was that once we got to the car. A few years ago, my boyfriend and I went to go hiking in the Pescadero Woods, NorCal. We ended up getting lost and not getting there till about 3:30, it closed at 5, so we decided to smoke a little before the end walk. Mind you, this is nothing new to me and I had been smoking for the previous 6 years constantly. So we began our hike and there's multiple trails leading to an abundance of hiking options. Right away I feel completely wrong. I have an overwhelming sense of dread to the extent I can't even put out words and explain it to my boyfriend. Over the course of an hour we end up at a bench. Doesn't matter what trail we take, how far we walk, again and again we come to the same bench. At this point I start expressing how the situation doesn't make sense and that I would like to go back now. We walk a little further and see a water fountain. My boyfriend runs up to it and I'm about 20 feet behind and turn to face another trail. When I look down this trail I see a deer about 15 feet in front of me. I put that in parentheses because this was anything but. I have been trying to find the words since then on how to explain this situation, but the best I can do is this. I looked at this thing and it was like my mind was telling me it was a deer. But every gut feeling and internal reaction was convinced I was looking at something that wanted me to think it was a deer. It was so wrong. I could not honestly comprehend what I was seeing. Again, it was 15 feet away, so that should not have been an issue at all. After staring for about 2 minutes and it motionless, I called my boyfriend over because at this point I honestly thought I was hallucinating. Nothing made sense on what I was seeing. I called him over, he gets to the trailhead and I said, "What do you see?" He responded, "I think it's a deer, but it's not right." Then he proceeds to walk forward to it. When I say my heart dropped, I kid you not, I freaked out. I grabbed him by the shirt and told him to walk to the car and not turn around. On the way home I asked him what he saw and he said it was supposed to be a deer but wasn't. This is back in Mexico when I was close to 6 years old. In small towns in Mexico it is common that the bathroom is detached from the home, or sometimes, like in our situation, in a room on top of the roof. Roofs in Mexico are usually flat cement roofs, The rule in my house was if you have to pee at night you have to go pee in the lawn. Don't wake mom up unless you have to go number 2, then she'll take you upstairs. Well, on this day I went out to pee and I'm a girl, so I'm squatting. I look up and see a light floating above my roof. I thought it was a street light at first. But it starts moving closer and closer to me. I start panicking, but my immediate reaction was to freeze. I could not move. I was in complete shock. Suddenly I felt something tell me to move. I say felt because it wasn't like I actually heard it, but more like a knowing. Run. Move. Get out. I remember running to my room while my pants were still wrapped around my ankles. I couldn't sleep all night. The next day I remember telling my cousins about it. They all said it was probably a witch. I did not tell my parents because that house was also haunted as heck and I already knew the response I would get. Oh, it's nothing. After this I wet the bed until I was around 8 or 9. Even after I moved to the US I used to think it was some kind of ghost, but I'm also leaning now towards a UFO. Although, every day on a Wednesday at the same time you could hear what sounded like a rock hit the roof and then roll around the entire roof from one end to another. So it might have also been my haunted ass roof. During my trip to visiting a friend at TX I saw a green hooded figure while we were driving by. It was like the Grim Reaper but in a dark green. It was daytime and I didn't catch it at my peripheral, I was looking straight at it, so I know what I saw. Then what followed was series of unfortunate event. First we got kick out my friend house because my friend fought with his brother and the dad kick us out 3 days before our flights. We have to rent a car because my friend car broke down 3 times during the trips. The parent refused to co-sign the rental to save me $100 despite the mom came to me about concern that my friend car can't make a 2-way trip to the airport. And to fight the boredom we decided to drive to New Orleans. And way back I got a speeding ticket on a bridge because it was one those bridge that change speed limits depend which part of the bridge, aka a trap for non-local. Mind you, we were 5 minutes from getting out of Louisiana, and once we got out Louisiana I told my friend that is a TX natives to drive since he knows the roads and if we get pull over they might be more lenient. 2 minutes later we got pull over again. This time for staying in the right lane too long, unbeknownst to us at the time the car reek of weed, because the a-hole friend chose to smoke just before we left the motels and just have the joint sitting at the car. This was the same friend that suggested the drive to Louisiana who after getting there told us he has no more money to even pay for his own meal, let alone pitch in for the gas money, so the cop took us all out and fined each with $500 of drug paraphernalia charges, which was lucky considering it was TX. After all that it took us 5 hours just to find one available hotels. And it was definitely haunted. At 3 in the morning we can hear someone running back and forth on the floor above us. Then when we finally got back I got my heart stomped. So yeah, good time. This was just this morning and supremely creepy, so why not? My husband and I woke up around 6 a.m. to the sound of a sick cat yowling. If you've had a cat, you know exactly what kind of awful sound that is. It was windy and storming all night, so this was loud enough to be heard over the tail end of the frozen mix. One of our cats is sound asleep at the foot of our bed. After confirming, yes, we both heard that noise, he asks whether I want to check on our kid or the other cat. I opt for the other cat. The kitten is sleeping in my chair and not pleased about being checked. Our kid is also sound asleep, not making awful sounds. I can't explain it. We both heard it. We lost one of our cats to heart defect with a rapid deterioration. That low, pained yowl is a sound we definitely both know. It's living creature sound and it sounded like it was just outside our door. We both woke up in a cold sweat. It's possible that we both had a nightmare and woke up at the same time. The one thing I do know is that it was absolutely not how I wanted to wake up today at all. We've definitely been pondering what that hell that was on and off all day. Still creeps me out to this day. I wasn't a sick kid or anything, but I remember one time when I was, oldest, 6 years old and sleep on the couch with a bucket sick and I had a very detailed dream. Probably inspired by the Pagemaster movie, but I was in a really old library with my father. He was looking for a new sci-fi book and I felt drawn to a section with old-fashioned leather-bound books. I pulled one from the shelf and flipped through it. I went to put it back but the void where I had drawn it from was pure black and a small white light could be seen. I stared and watched as the white light came closer and formed a tiny human shape. As it walked forward I remember specifically the sounds, a needle being dropped on a tile floor followed by a phone book being dropped on a wooden floor. The needle echoed but the book did not. As the form got closer the noise got louder too. When it reached the edge of the shelf it was the same height as the books. I remember being terrified of it so I ran. There were adults around me but they heard and saw nothing. I screamed for my dad but couldn't find him. When I looked back at what I was running from it was now hunched over and had its legs nearly curled up to its chest as it tried to fit inside the library and reach out to me. I couldn't hear my screaming or anything but the repeated needle and phone book. Pretty sure as it reached out to me I woke up, vomited, and the world kept spinning even though I was awake. Couldn't hurt anything but those damn sounds. I used my pillow to try and drown it out till I fell back asleep. This memory is super clear and the sounds are insanely specific. When I was young, I had a cousin who I looked a lot alike, and we were basically best friends. Sadly, she died in a horrible car accident when I was only 6. I remember shrieking when I was told I couldn't go to the funeral. My parents had good reason for keeping me home. Much later, when I was, 18, my cousin's dad passed. Drank himself to death. I went to this funeral, and everyone was staring at me. Everyone. It was absolutely eerie how many people were looking at me. They'd whisper. I had no idea what was going on until my aunt came up, smiling and teary, and told me how much I looked like my cousin, how I was exactly what she'd look like if she'd lived. For the entire 2 hours there were eyes on me, staring at me endlessly. I've never felt so self-conscious and so, it was very much an out-of-body experience. I swear people looked at me more than my dead uncle. Knowing everyone was staring because I looked like their mental picture of a little girl who had died. At the funeral of her father who died at the bottom of a bottle. Got the duck out of there as soon as I was unable. Thinking about everyone's expressions and the way their eyes felt on my back unnerves me to this day. When I was about 10 years old I was on a road trip with my family. My mother really needed to pee so my dad found a rest stop. Mom ran out of the car and into the ladies' room. I took my time getting out of the car and ambled into the place and was just starting to go down the hall where the bathrooms were. I started making my way and then something stopped me. A huge man had my mom over his shoulder and was walking down the hall with her. My mom is tiny, only about 5 feet tall. I was rooted in my place and could only say Mom, Mom. The man went right by me and into the main area. Fortunately, my father was standing there and started going after the guy. The big man dropped my mother and ran off. My mom and dad just hugged each other and my mom was crying. That man had grabbed her in the empty bathroom and tried to make off with her. My parents sat in the car and called the police. We ended staying the night in that town as the police wanted my mom to look at pictures to see if she could pick him out in the morning. My mom didn't recognize anyone in the photos. We continued on with our trip and now have a rule that nobody can go to the bathrooms by themselves at rest stops. I should also note that this incident took place at midnight and the rest stop was pretty empty. This just happened last evening. I was coming down the staircase and thought I could hear my husband shuffling around in the kitchen. I called out, "Eddie, is that you?" I heard a familiar, male voice say, "Yes." As I walk into the kitchen I see our cat, Tony, sitting on the floor staring towards the kitchen stove. I look around and don't see my husband, but I hear his tractor running and moving around outside. I immediately say, "Sorry, wrong Eddie," and the same voice says, "Oh." I walked outside to confirm that my husband was indeed on his tractor and told him what just happened. We shared a knowing look and went on about our evening. My deceased father-in-law was named Eddie too. Tony was his cat up until his death, and he passed away in the kitchen, by the stove. It was his voice I heard. About a month ago I heard him calling my name while my husband was at work. Sometimes I can smell faint whiffs of his pipe tobacco or objects that belong to him mysteriously move around. Other things have happened that I mentally filed away as being my best friend Jim. He passed away in our house when I was 4 years old. He was an elderly man that my parents were very close to. He was grandfatherly and the best friend I ever had. Our house was owned by my husband's family but rented to Jim and his family. After they passed away, my in-laws acquired it. Then after my father-in-law passed away, and my mother-in-law remarried, we inherited the house and apparently their spirit inhabitants as well. I find it all strange but not creepy. When I was in high school my family and I lived in a loft above an insurance business downtown, and it was a smallish building. Small enough that there was only room for one apartment, so we were the only people living there. At the time I would get up the earliest so everything was pretty quiet aside from the usual car noises from outside. One Monday I woke up to my alarm and I thought I heard a jingling sound. I turned my alarm off and sat up in my bed listening for a few seconds before I heard it again. I couldn't think of an explanation. I didn't have anything with bells on it that I could think of. I looked under my bed and around my room to see if anything had fallen that would make a sound like that, but there was nothing. The setup of this apartment was weird. I had to walk through my little brother's room to get to my room, and so I walked through his room on my way out to the living room and kitchen. My brother was still sound asleep and I didn't see any toys around that would jingle like that. Upon entering the living room, I immediately noticed that the laundry room door was open. Not wide open, but cracked open enough to make it obvious. We always kept that door closed unless we were in there doing laundry. I looked around and didn't see anything out of place. When I got back from school, I asked my parents and brother if they had left the laundry room door open, and they claimed not to. On Tuesday everything was normal, but Wednesday the same exact scenario happened again. I woke up and heard unexplained jingling, and found the laundry room door cracked open again. Fast forward about a year later, my mom had moved the stove for the first time since we lived there, and we found cat toys underneath. Cat toys with bells in them that jingled just like what I had heard before. When we initially moved in, my mom had found what appeared to be cat litter on the floor in the laundry room, and she had even heard a cat meowing at one point and looked everywhere only to find nothing, and assumed that it must have come from outside. After piecing all of this together though, we couldn't help but wonder if we had a ghost cat from a previous tenant living with us. Batting at the jingle toys, and going into the laundry room to use the litter box. The door was open just enough for a cat to fit through. It never happened again after those 2 days though. Weird.